Okay. All right, give me a thumbs up if you see that, and we will get rolling. Nice one, nice one. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to throw this into full screen here. So this is a subject that obviously spans a very wide set of variables depending on what it is you sell, but there's a few things that we've learned over the last year or so that we're trying to sort of crystallize and put a few principles together that speak to how we've been able to either find the right price for something or adjust the price for something. So I'm gonna go through a couple of ideas, and then we'll probably take 10-15 minutes, then we can get into questions and just have a conversation about what we went through. If that sounds good, we'll roll. Cool. Okay, so first idea here is it's really the distinction between what we're going to refer to as a like low price product and a high price product. So I think for the function of like understanding the concept, it's really the difference between selling a service and selling a product. So on the left hand side, you're selling a product at, let's say a low price for this is $100, and on the right hand side we have a $10,000 product. So $100 product versus a $10,000 product, just by function of how many people have $10,000 to spend on something, your buyer pool shrinks enormously. Obviously these are just gestural diagrams right now, but the idea is, for every significant price increase you put on your product, your buyer pool decreases. If you're selling a service at a high price point, then you should be locked in fairly narrowly on who that person is. So the buyer pool is smaller by default, just based on the fact that the person has a very specific need, and it is a very specific, fills a very specific set of parameters in which qualifies them to work with you. So just to kind of frame up the conversation, thinking about the lower price your product is, the more people can afford it, essentially. So if we look at this through the lens of how you reach $1 million in revenue. So just this, I find a helpful exercise just to set perspective. So if you're selling a $10 product, you need to sell it to 100,000 people to make $1 million, right? There's 100,000 people is a lot of people. And if you are able to change that dynamic to get people to pay you $10 a month, you need 8,333 people over the course of a year to pay you $10 a month to make $1 million of revenue. And 8,333 people is not a small number either, especially if you account for the fact you need all 8,300 of those people to not cancel at some point during the year. So just to get a perspective for the numbers here, and based on your goals and based on the speed at which you want to move, generally speaking, the bottom of this diagram is the faster way to get to a higher revenue number than the top. So at the top, you have these unicorn software brands, not necessarily unicorn, maybe that's the wrong term, but software brands that put a lot of time, energy, and effort into slowly growing that base of people, versus a service business or a business that has higher cost but can charge a higher price. You need fewer clients on that side. But again, no small feat to be able to deliver $100,000 worth of services 10 times. That's, I would say, for an individual, very, very difficult, unless you're talking about who is that, like Annie Leibovitz, let's say, does a $50,000 photo shoot and does 20 of those a year, you can make $1 million, right? There's very few people that can fulfill at that level on their own. So the sweet spot above that is kind of this $10,000 per engagement. Again, you need to get 100 of those and we're talking about $1 million here, obviously. You could cut this down by 10. You have to sell 10 people a $10,000 product to make $100,000 a year. Just to give some perspective on how that breaks down. So another way to look at price, another way to think about price is the expectation that price sets. And there's a really interesting balance in here where your price is communicating something about your product in the same way that your copy is, in the same way that your brand is, so it's another device to create a position for your product in the market. And typically speaking, I can't think of any exceptions off the top of my head. There's like the expectation increases with the price increasing. So if we're selling a product at $100, the expectation is very different than a product we're selling at $1,000, right? And the idea of how we can comfortably increase that price is something that we talk about a lot, and that's the idea of like building price on top of proof. So another way to think about this idea is you're reframing this this transition or the quality of the product from something that may happen on the left hand side here. So someone pays you $100, and maybe this is an information product, maybe this is a template or something that's fairly scalable on your end, that again, you can't necessarily make a promise that something is going to happen because your involvement is not as heavy. You don't have complete agency over the result in that case. So the price reflects the fact that they have to put the work in to make this happen, versus, you know, on the service side, on the right hand side here, your accountability increases, but in parallel with your accountability increasing, the price increases, but your responsibility is to deliver a certain result too. So outcome is another way that, another lever on how to adjust price. But one of the things that we've learned in building Visualize Value has really been this idea of social proof as a loss leader for what we've been doing. So we kind of transitioned from, we took kind of a long transition from a service business that was positioned completely different than this, because we were able to build up proof and start getting people to pay for a product while we started to prove it out. And then as we gathered that proof, we slowly were able to ratchet up the market price of the product that we were building. So one of the other things I wanted to share here is just like the different ways you can think about proof and these levers of price. So proof of work, I think, let's say this is in the context of the How to Visualize Value course that we just brought out. The idea that product has validity, or you can ask someone to pay a certain price for it based on the fact that, you know, these are the principles that we have used in the market and have a proven track record. So proof of work in that case is something we built for ourselves. So this doesn't necessarily mean quantitative results. So if you're a photographer or a video editor or, you know, a creative of some sort, it's your portfolio, right? It's showing that you have the ability to create something. Then the next tier over is qualitative. So you get proof that you have done it for the type of people that you want to continue selling it to. So that's, you know, whether that's, I think the degrees of proof in there are, you know, written testimonials all the way through to like video testimonials. One of the most powerful assets I think you can use, especially in the early stages, is just endorsement from other people. People buy from other people, right? I don't know what the statistic is, but 85-90% of people would trust the review of another person over, you know, the copy that a brand or a product would write about itself. So always worth keeping in mind when you're trying to justify prices, this idea of having people vouch for what you can do. And then quantitative is a whole nother category of proof, depending on what you do. I think if your product or service has a direct ROI, this is a really powerful a way to package up case studies and say person X invested this and the outcome was 2x, 3x, 4x over this amount of time. And there are variables in there that aren't just specific to money, revenue. You can talk about anything that's quantifiable, right? Time, the amount of people that they would have had to use to create the result that you created. So anything you can quantitatively make a comparison to position yourself as a better alternative, that that becomes your quantitative proof. Another point we wanted to talk about is, and this is anecdotal based on our experience, there comes a point in pricing where there is a human intervention required. There's you have to get on the phone with somebody, you have to build a relationship with somebody, and we've managed to get that up to $1,000 at this point. So someone will pay $1,000 before they've spoken to us on the phone. That's just based on one product that we have out, the bespoke trust profile, which was we're not going to do many of them anymore. We're going to put the price up again, but the idea that you could kind of feel out the market for where that point of resistance is in, punching your credit card number in for something before you speak to somebody. I think that's a reflection of how much equity you have in the market and how much, it's a question of trust. I think there are people in the world that could put a Calendly link up and say it's $100,000 to talk to me, and some people would pay it, right? It's the idea of this number being reflective of how much the market trusts you. So I think that's another thing to pay attention to. There are things that sit on the left-hand side of this spectrum that really, it doesn't necessarily matter who is behind it, or the person that's selling it is less important than what the product is, and people will buy that based on the way the product is positioned. Versus on the right hand side of the spectrum, it's way more important who is delivering the service, what their track record is, have I spoken to them, do I trust them, etc., etc. So that kind of just increases as we go from left to right here, the need to sell personally. And this is another sort of, not a hard and fast rule, but I think a guiding principle of building products and thinking about how you can write compelling copy and stand very firmly behind what you're doing. If you're able to sort of project out what the proper implementation or the proper understanding of your product, your content, your service can do for someone, and if somebody extracts a maximum value from your product, can they get 100x return on their investment? And that's incredibly large for a reason, because it challenges you to get to that point of how can this become such a no-brainer purchase that the social proof that's going to come back to me as a result of me charging this price is going to allow me to continually not only increase the price of the product, but increase the quality of the product as I build too. So another way to think about this is the outcomes, and I think the things that we've experienced in building this are, there are certain things that will, the speed at which someone will get their credit card out of their wallet is dependent, I think, upon the promise that you make. So in a lot of cases, especially in B2B, if you can promise a return, it just becomes a fiduciary responsibility, right? If you can take $10,000 and turn it into $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for someone, then it's an easy decision. It's a fast decision for somebody to make. Status, I think, is another, this is more of an irrational lever. There is a pull to, I think the most obvious example of this is fashion and, buying things that signal something about yourself. That there's no real rational idea in there It's more about like, yeah, you can buy a $10 pair of shoes, or you can buy a $5,000 pair of shoes. They both do the same job, but one is going to tell other people something different about you than the $10 pair. So humans are quick to make those decisions, and then the harder things to sell, or the more like the longer cycles of understanding, come in this idea of spending less time, or saving people time, and increasing quality of life. So I think those are all important decisions and important factors in a purchase decision someone makes, but they are less less top of mind, right? People are geared to kind of hunt out the faster return, like which on the left hand side, money and status. These are the two things that are far more far easier decisions to make, far faster decisions to make. And in everything that we've sold, there's like an element of both of these things in there. So if we're producing materials for a business, or we're producing content for a business, then there's obviously, in some cases, there's a very, very close financial return to that. If it's pitch materials or it's sales materials, it's, creating something that is instantly going to have an impact on the bottom line of the business. And there's a status aspect to that, because you're going to feel more confident selling it that way. The business is going to be presented in a more compelling, like, in a way that elevates you as a result of how the business is positioned. And then time and stress are kind of proven out more in the relationship than on the front end. So they're just harder things to sell on the front end, because the magnetic qualities or characteristics of a product are really the money and status things on the left hand side. One other point to note is, though, the bigger the promise you make, the heavier the pressure is on you. So if you're promising a financial return, obviously that creates more stress for you, and there are more variables out of your control that typically get added to your plate as a result of you needing to like fulfill on that fiduciary duty. So if you're an agency and you say, campaign X is gonna make you an extra $100,000 a year, and then their sales team can't close the leads that you bring in, you have to come in and take more responsibility in order to fulfill on that result. So it's a lot of tightrope walk there too. The other thing to keep in mind is performance-based pricing. So a lot of a few people that we're good friends with work in e-commerce and kind of businesses that really do benefit from this idea of like, if you can create material or campaigns that perform, then you can create an instant return for a business owner, and there are no real like variables standing in between you and the better result. Whereas if you're working with a business that is like got a lot of human dependency between you and the end result, then that like breakdown in responsibility has an effect on your results. So performance-based pricing works much better when there are fewer dependencies on the client side. So if you've been around it for a while, you've seen this diagram before, but essentially this is how we've structured our service offering. So at the high end, the service is, we will take your problem off your plate. Let's have a phone call every week. We'll extract information and we'll relay that information and repackage that into materials that are gonna, give you what you need to either raise money, close more business, etc., etc. So we're gonna solve the problem, and based on how much you sell your services for, if we get this right, then this is a no-brainer investment, right? The second one is a productized service. So it's hands-on to some degree, but there's a formula that we follow. There are exercises that are very specific that we take people through, and the output is confined to a certain set of deliverables. So less heavy lifting on our end, and a faster turnaround. And then finally, like the product, again, we're in it right now. The idea that we can create an environment, or we can create something that scales exponentially, offer it at a much, much more affordable price point. But ultimately, the problem or the solution rests on the person who is implementing. So this is kind of the you can lead a horse to water situation. So you can give people as much material as you like, and that will expand out to as many people as are interested. But your individual ability to you're limited by time there, right? So your ability to get in and help every single person implement is not the goal here. The goal is to create material and create a scalable set of resources that people can use to reach their goals, whatever they may be. And then we just break that down one further. So your high touch, high price point is essentially you in person, like, you know, to go back to the earlier slide in the deck, this is really the $100,000 contract times 10 is probably a team of people delivering a result. The middle of that section is this hybrid model where you have a very scalable process and you can do, 100 of these a year. And the bottom one is, the 100,000 sales, 5,000 sales, whatever it might be. This is the real input here is like the quality of the content and your ability to market versus, the individual engagements or the individual relationships that you're building. So hopefully that brings all of the above into context as to how we've been thinking about it. And then I think this is the last thing we wanted to share, the idea of, drastically undercharging for something in order to get people in the door and create advocates. So this is the sequence in which we grew the Visualized Value community. We actually began with the Daily Manifesto as a PDF that was $20, and that would include access to a community. So originally we had built, I think, a couple hundred. I think the community actually came after the tool, So we sold the tool for a couple months, and then we decided to add a community on, emailed everybody that had bought the tool, brought them into a community, and then invested in creating content and, putting some structure around how the community works, got some proof, and, people, were getting a lot out of being in that environment, rated the material. So we got some proof. So we raised the price again. And then we decided, when we got to a certain point, it's like, okay, this has to shift to a model where we're getting paid recurring revenue. Otherwise, this becomes a unsustainable venture financially. So we just slowly ratcheted that up, collecting proof at each time. This was, I think, maybe 2 or 3 months apart between a couple of these price changes. So I think that our next iteration, this is not decided at this point, but our next iteration would be to, again, just prove the value beyond reasonable doubt and then raise the price one more time. We're not really focused on like getting tons and tons of people into this particular part of the Visualized Value business now. So we have this comfortable level and a great community, and now it's about refining the quality of the product, and we will go for we'll kind of adjust the model to be less about the volume of people that we bring in, but more about the how good of a match they are for the product. And then I think this is the last piece of this document. One of the really effective components in selling the course that we've been building has been not only the organic promotion on Twitter. I think we sold it in middle of May, and then a couple of weeks later just sent out this email and said, thank you very much for buying. Thank you very much for buying the course. Hope you loved it. Like, if you have a little bit of time, we'd love to get your feedback. Here's a couple of options. And if you are able to give some feedback, we'd love to offer you a token of our gratitude in return. And I did this in 2 different ways. I split test this, one with a one with the gift up front, so you didn't have to respond to get the gift, and the second with the gift as a result of you writing a review. And obviously the second version where we asked for people to reach out was, I think that converted like 10-15%. The first one was like 0.5%, but every single person downloaded the gift. So yeah, one of the other important things I think in being able to slowly raise the price is really, I was always under the assumption that people will go out and promote your stuff for you if it's great, but that's a myth, right? People have so much of a difficult time even promoting their own stuff. So the idea that, they're going to go out of their way to, even if they love what you're doing, the idea that they're going to go out of their way to promote it when they've got their own things to worry about and figure out is a little bit fantasy land. So figuring out ways to reach out to people, get feedback, have them, not in a dishonest way or a non-genuine way, have them like give genuine feedback on the product, and then use that as a catalyst for, bringing more people into the ecosystem and helping other people understand what the value is. Because ultimately the people that describe their experience with the product are going to have a better, it's going to be a better story. It's going to be more relatable and relevant to the people that want to use it. So we can write product copy all day long, but if the product copy or the reviews are written in the voice of people using the course, I think it's 1,000 times more effective, and that's proven to be true for the remainder of the sales cycle of this product, at least. One other piece is, and we covered this in an earlier presentation, but there was a question in Slack around how do you determine whether or not your clients can afford your services? And we kind of just put a very simple barrier in place here. So if you apply for a consultation, we throw a question in at the end of that questionnaire that says, are you in a position to invest X to engage our team to make this happen? So if somebody answers no to that question, then we have a very nice email templated out where we say, look, we're not in a position to take on work in this budget range at the moment. We appreciate your interest. Here are a couple of resources. Let's maybe work together again in the future. And that's been very effective. So that's the most effective way around that, especially if you're doing these things remotely. So I think that is our last slide. Any questions? Minnow, good question. So Minnow asks, what is the best kind of proof of work for providing creative direction, i.e. branding, strategy, helping connect the dots? Something that doesn't have a quantitative ROI? Is it just portfolio work or testimonials? This is honestly, man, I've spent 18 months, 2 years down this hole of trying to quantify that, because we started in the same spot, right? If you're a creative, you have a creative solution, or you have a creative ability that you can articulate a solution to pretty much any problem, or like you can help any brand go from 1 to 2, and I think like the unfortunate answer is like it's really difficult to tell a compelling story to everybody. The idea that like more often than not, and this is one of the things that we realized in transitioning from corporate work to like smaller B2B, working with principals of businesses, is that you are shielded from the metrics of big businesses. So there are a lot of, you can unmute, Minna. Let's throw this into a conversation. But one of the things we realized is like if the stakeholder you're working with doesn't have the ability to measure the output or the impact of the work you're doing, then it's really hard to sell to them, because I think that becomes like there's just like an education gap, there's an understanding gap. I think there's thousands, like hundreds of thousands of agencies in this space right now, and I like until you get to a position where you have at least a semblance of a sequence of events that you want to take someone through, or like a productized version of what you do,
a framework. Yeah,
I just haven't found anyone be able to crack that, unless it's like at a corporate scale where someone plays golf with someone else or has a relationship with this person. And at a small scale, like I think it's just like an unfortunate truth that unless you're hyper focused on a specific problem, then you're sort of a victim of your ability to solve a bunch of different problems, right?
Yeah. And I think like in a huge agency or people that are charging $100,000 for something, a lot of times the problem you're solving is the person who hired you to make them look as good as possible, right? Mm-hmm. You're trying to make them get promoted too. And so their investment in you is saying, hey, if I do this, I'm going to look really good to my boss, right? And so there's that level of something to it. But in a small, medium company, like when you're just talking to the principal, it's less about metrics to help them look good, but then for them to go and steer the business in a certain way or a certain kind of way. And I think thinking through how do I clarify their message through a framework of narrative storytelling, and how do I align that with the whole team? And that's such high level thinking and strategy, and the execution can be in so many different ways. And I'm not coming in and saying I can make you a video and design a website and do all that stuff, but the creative direction of being able to connect those dots for someone is valuable. But then there's no ROI to that. I was just talking with Franco about it being just a before and after. You can show what it was and what it wasn't, but there isn't quantitative numbers to put value to it,
But there is there is a way to position something like that as a profitable tool for a business. So the way as you describe that, I think about that as you could productize something like that as like an internal narrative for a business, right? The idea of the fractured nature of your internal teams and the relationships that don't work together within your organization. Like if you had an asset or the ability to get everybody to coalesce around this vision for the business, told in a way that is actually compelling.
Yes.
Is what is that asset worth to you? To have all of your staff running in the right direction and everybody understanding what the priorities of the organization are, I think that is super valuable. And that's something that you could productize to some extent, right? It's like I see it as like a strategic playbook, or there's this strategic playbook that you can wrap some kind of compelling narrative around to get people on board. One of the most resonant components of the visualized value work when we started doing it is actually an accidental byproduct, which is internal understanding. And you can really blow out that pain point or that phenomenon, because it exists in every big business. Is this person doesn't know what that person's doing, that person doesn't know what this person's doing, and how they're supposed to work together. You could tell a really compelling story around that. I think if that's what you're interested in doing, it's almost like a narrative sprint,
because when you ladder up and
go on, carry on.
Like when you ladder up the market execution and you try to figure out, okay, so why do you want to do this? Then why? It goes all the way to internal communication, and that, oh, we don't even know amongst ourselves
Yeah.
what we want to do. And
Yeah.
so it starts internal, and then that just reflects on external marketing. And so me thinking through it is all that, but it's like, what is the monetary number of alignment within a company, like that. And it might be different for each company, but it becomes so esoteric.
Yeah, and one of the things, another thing that I think helps make it more tangible for businesses of that scale or businesses that have that problem are things like, this is a 1-day workshop followed by X set of deliverables that get refined over this period of time. It's like making it more tangible for them. And I think what you're saying about like, what you really need is an impartial observer to come in and say why, and then be able to turn all of the answers to those whys into a thing that means nobody asks that why question again about this particular thing. Does that make sense? I think you're frozen.
Yeah. So you said an impartial observer, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The idea that like you could translate. I think if your buyer is in that situation, it's like, how do you package your services in a way that they like there's something that they buy? That's I think another thing that's tricky in that space is like agencies can kind of coast off reputation or do these elaborate pitch decks, but the idea that you could get in before that point and say, look, my function is to help you understand what you're chasing after and codify that. I think there's something there. But yeah, so much of it is about like, regardless of like what your process is, it's like getting it to a point where it feels tangible to them and they're buying a thing. And that's going to really help you get to the place of like, this is how I reverse engineer my process to produce the thing. One of the tracks that we ended up going down, but didn't like completely build out for the Trust Accelerator business, the podcast, like the content agency that we built. I don't know how familiar you are with that. It was a couple office hours ago. Was a internal corporate podcast. So we had all the tools in place. We had all the like pieces of that puzzle. It's like, how useful would it be for you to be able to tell your story internally and have your all your departments really understand like where the business is going and what people are doing and expose these different layers and stories. So it's like helping them get out of their own way in a sense. But I think speaking more specifically to that pain point that they're like struggling to define internally, sounds like that's a more precise position than like promising an external outcome or a business outcome where like the real problem exists way further back in the process, and that's the bit that you're good at and that's the bit that you want to solve, and that's the bit that everybody's going to have like empathy for.
I don't want to take up too much time, but it's just such an interesting thought exercise when you put it to pricing and what people are willing to buy and on the spectrum. But yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, there's definitely something in there. We got a friend who does like corporate workshops, so he has a formula for like getting people in a room and extracting ideas and turning it into something. And I think like he doesn't actually produce product off the back of that, but if you did, that's kind of a compelling thing to buy, right? Especially for a company that's like, where are we going, what's going on? It's like,
that's the way I'm thinking.
Buy a couple of days with us, and then you not only will have that like experience of getting people talking to each other, but you'll have this thing, the Minnow formula, which is the visual narrative, video, whatever it might be, that ties everybody together.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, man. No, it's a fun conversation. And when I like started down this path, this was like the thing that I just could not get my head past for so long, is the stakeholder being like unable to understand the value. And it was like, it took a long time to recognize that I was the bottleneck, like my inability to reframe what we do as a product that is easy for them to buy. That's the problem. It's not their misunderstanding. Like if you like start to understand that you're the bottleneck and the way you're speaking is like, regardless of how much you believe it and how right you think you are, like if they don't get it, you're not right, right? It's a fascinating
Yeah.
process. Nicole says she has a follow-up question to this, and then we'll go back up to the previous one.
Okay. Yeah, others had questions ahead of me in the queue, though. So I think I'm understanding this thread. I just wanted to ask, it would appear to me that it doesn't matter what you're seeking to put out there. When I came to visualize value, I immediately researched for proof of value.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to throw that into this conversation just to say, I'm probably not the only one who, before buying, wants to see the value behind even someone who's emerging, but I will invest in and I will take that. Then I assess the risk and I say, oh yes, you know, he's been in the corporate world, or they've been in the corporate world. They have a lot of social proof behind them. I'll go to the LinkedIn, I'll go to the website, and I'll make that determination. So for any of us who are either launching into a new space, seeking to productize ourselves in a unique way, but we have some measure of proof behind us, I think putting that piece out, putting out the social proof in an intelligent way is probably one of the easiest things you can do
100%.
moving forward.
Yeah, and I totally agree, Nicole. I think the one other point that a lot of us overlook is that like the ability, and we're not doing even anywhere close to as good of a job as we could be with social proof. Like we've had a couple of things just like happen naturally, but there's so much more that we could be doing, like, you know, highlighting people within the community themselves, like putting interviews on with people. There's like this conversation itself, there's like segments of this that could be chopped out and used as proof on the front end to bring more people into the product itself. So I think the like tendency to like not expose more of your expertise is this weird thing that we all do for some, like it's counterintuitive, but we do it anyway. The idea that people just kind of want to see the raw ingredients, and as soon as they do, they're in. I think one of the biggest proponents of membership for this was like a free Google document that I put out a couple months ago that was like, here's one of our office hours that I think will help people. It was when the COVID situation just started getting out of hand, where it's like, here's a way to think about how to organize your expertise and put it out as content. And when people see this organic conversation on the back end, they're like, oh, I want to be a part of that, let me in. I think a lot of us have this tendency to like over market and try to like polish up the front end to the point where we're actually hiding the thing that is valuable. So that's another perspective on that. I think that's valid. And we also underestimate that everybody is trying to amplify their own voice. So if you can bring them into your world to do that, I think that gives credibility to what you're doing too. So if there's somebody in your community that's gotten a result from what you do, or somebody you've worked with in the past that has had some level of success with their interaction with you, like just talk to them in public and the proof just becomes part of the conversation. It's pretty powerful when you start to chip away at the desire to protect the stuff on the like behind the paywall, as it were. All right. David asked, if you're going to start on one end and move to the other, where would you recommend? To clarify, I'm referring to service versus product. So our journey was service to product. I think it's much easier to sell product when you have a track record in service, and this is wholly dependent on the product. I'm talking about like if you're well, essentially what we're doing with our product is figuring out a way to codify the service element of our business. So I think you have to have experience in that area of service in order to build that product. So one of the things that was really interesting in developing the product itself was, Celia and I, like, I would build sections of the product and then would give it to Celia to run through it, because you had to assume that if I'm not in the room, if I'm nowhere near this thing and it's just running, you know, as a sequence of media or lessons or whatever else to somebody that has no design experience, then the most important thing is that you're not, you know, missing any part of that journey, or you're communicating the full extent of steps required to get where you want somebody to go. And I think service is, you know, in the case of design at least, service is a really important way to learn marketable skills. Like if you can sell a service, then you have a set of skills that the market will pay for. So you can then productize those skills and other people can leverage them to, you know, go to market and get paid to do what you've been doing. So I'm trying to think of an exception, but I honestly think it's maybe service and product is a confusing set of set of words. It's more about like experience first. So I think with information products, obviously you have to go through the process of gathering that information or that experience in order to package it into a product that somebody can buy and experience. So that's a long-winded answer, but I would imagine the people that start at the product end either have to sell their product at a much, much lower price because they don't have the reputational leverage to jack the price up, or their like products don't start out very good because they haven't got the market experience to productize something valuable. Does that help, David? All right, we got Gabriel asked, what's your take on capitalizing on the present, charging a fee, versus exercising creative options to align you and the service you provide to the health of the project so that passive income can be generated in the future or after the fact? Something like charging a very small fee for the service, but charge a % of the revenue that's generated for the first 6 months of monetizing. Interested in your take on this sort of thing and how it relates to pricing. Yeah, so Gabriel, this is, I think, dependent on how closely your services align with revenue generation. So I think I have narrow experience in this. Like if you work in, like if you're a media buyer and you can see in Ads Manager how much revenue your campaigns have generated for a business, then I think there's a very strong argument you can make for you know, incentivizing your team to perform better. So there's an aligned incentive there with yourself and the client. I think when you get into more complex businesses, or when you're providing a service that is more difficult to measure, that becomes a much harder conversation and potentially like a ton more administration and management on your end to even understand what is attributable to your efforts. So I think when the performance of your work is very easily measured and there's transparency into what you've done and how it's affecting the outcome, then by all means negotiate that. But I think it can be like incredibly difficult when you are, you know, one piece of a very complicated machine, and then you get into these like situations where, you know, who is really responsible for closing this lead, or who is really responsible for this extra bump in revenue that came from organic traffic because we had, you know, this interview happen. And so that's a long-winded way around it, but we don't do that because our like, I think the only way it would make sense for us would just be equity in the business itself. So we'll help you build the assets, we'll help you take the product to market, we'll develop all of this messaging, but we want a slice of the business from day zero, versus like we want to try our best to attribute sales to the work that we're doing. So two very different approaches there. I think the equity conversation again is like, how effective can you really be like at doing that at scale? I would argue that, you know, building, like having equity of 2, 3, 4 businesses, like there's a lot of responsibility there. And if you're really able to deliver incredible results for 3, 4 businesses at a time, then why aren't you building your own business, right? Let me know if that helps, Gabriel. It's like it's a big topic. Yes. Yeah, Minno's right. The idea of like the backwards path is like information or content first. So I think there's like, maybe the best example of that would be like an author, you know, like say you've written an incredible book and you've spent 10 years researching it, then the model is inverted. So if you're James Clear, let's say you've written Atomic Habits, everyone thinks this is incredible. Like you can then go to Accenture and say, I'll come in and run a 1-day workshop for you guys about like corporate habits, right? You reverse the situation there, but it's a way bigger bet on yourself on the front end. And, you know, how many authors get New York Times bestsellers first versus, you know, creating a really compelling pitch to build a service business, generate results, and then, you know, potentially still launch a writing career and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's a good point, Mano. You could do it the other way around, but it's like it's a bigger bet with like more risk, I would say. Jesse asked, what's been the profile of the businesses you get the best results for? So I would say the best results that our materials generate are businesses that have mostly like technology businesses that generate a very specific outcome, but the technology is really difficult to understand. So where they would typically use like technical jargon to explain what they do and like obfuscate the outcome of the technology, we just able to really simplify like the actual relationships that exist between, whether it's like the pieces of the business or the people and the customers and the like transaction that happens. So like one of our best clients was an e-commerce accelerator. So how before they work with us, they're just positioned as like, we're an e-commerce agency, come and work with us, to we are like a fully integrated supply chain through, well, manufacturing through supply chain, through digital marketing, through like customer service. We articulate the entire like breadth of services they're able to provide a business. And, you know, overnight they're able to increase their prices massively. They're able to like speak to bigger clients because the way they're presented is that much more sophisticated. Another example was someone who helps insurance agencies scale in the States. It's a very similar situation where you're able to, you know, just really clarify what it is they do, as opposed to just positioned as this like stock photo website. It's like, hey, we help insurance agencies grow. It's like just a totally different level of detail and level of comprehension when they have those materials. There's I'm trying to think of, I mean, we haven't had clients where we haven't been able to get much better results, honestly, but the I think the technology ones are particularly interesting because there's people who understand technology are typically really bad at explaining what it does, or like who it's for and what's actually happening. They're just like a little stubborn in like just referring to the matter of fact application of technology, as opposed to like pulling back and explaining what the impact is on people. All right, I think we're good here. Hopefully that was a useful conversation. As always, this will be uploaded, and any more questions, stick them in the Mighty Networks or Slack, and we'll keep chatting about them. And anyone has any like contextual pricing questions about what they're selling or what they're doing, then let's get a discussion going in Slack, and look forward to carrying it on. And next week, if there's any topics you want to throw out for discussion, chuck them in office hours. If not, we will land on something. Appreciate you all. Be well. Thank you very much. Good morning, good night, good afternoon.